Hello, everyone. I'm Beth Cougler Blom, and this is another episode of Facilitating on Purpose, the space where we talk about designing and facilitating learning. In this episode, I'm pleased to present to you a conversation I had with Tolu Noah. Tolu is an educational developer at California State University in California, and she's just written a book called Designing and Facilitating Workshops with Intentionality. Now, that title of the book, I had to do a double take at one point because I thought, oh, that's so funny. In higher ed or in post-secondary, they don't usually use the word workshops for the courses that they teach to students. But here's the catch. This book that Tolu has written isn't for faculty who are teaching students necessarily, although they could find a lot of benefit from it. This is actually for people who teach faculty development workshops or people teaching about teaching and facilitation to get meta like that in those environments and of course beyond as well. I read the book and I know that all of the concepts that Tolu talks about in the book are really relevant to those of us who work outside the higher education context as well. So stick with us and you are going to hear so many details that you will find useful when you're designing and facilitating workshops in whatever your context is. Here's Tolu and I hope you enjoy the show. Tolu, so happy to see you. Thanks for joining me on the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
I have a sense that maybe your last few months have been kind of busy since you published your book.
Just a little bit.
How has it been? What's the ride been like since publishing?
Honestly, it's been really awesome. This is my first book, so the whole process has just been a massive learning journey in terms of, okay, what exactly does this entail? And then what does it look like once the book is finally out and all of that. And so I've been really enjoying talking to different people about the book. And I'm starting to get messages from readers, which is really exciting. Someone in Sweden reached out and was like, oh, I've read your book and I'm using it to redesign, some courses that I have coming up. And someone else reached out that they're using it for a conference. And so, yeah, it's just cool to now be hearing from people that are reading it and seeing how they're applying the ideas from it, which has been really nice.
Oh, that's so exciting. And I've seen that too. I've seen a few people on LinkedIn, particularly, because I think that's the only social media platform that you and I share. I'm not on Blue Sky, but I've seen people commenting about it and tagging you in. Like it does seem like some good buzz is going. So I hope you feel it too.
Yeah, very thankful for that. So thanks to everyone who supported it.
So tell us what the book's called and maybe then go into why did you write it? What was the call for you to write a book in the field of learning, design, and facilitation?
Yeah, so the book is called Designing and Facilitating Workshops with Intentionality. And the inspiration kind of came from a few different places. One is that in higher ed specifically, we don't currently have a really in-depth guide about workshop design and facilitation that's geared towards people who are like educational developers and instructional designers who are working specifically in this realm. And so I thought this could be a really great resource to come alongside people in the work that they're doing. And along with that, I just generally have a really big passion for professional learning. Like I love going to all the workshops I can and learning as much as I can. And so I felt like this would be a really great way to kind of pull together all of the resources that have been really helpful to me in my work and hopefully share some things that would be helpful to other people as they're also trying to continue to develop, their own skills in facilitation.
I think that's such a great point that there really, as I think about it too, there really aren't, and I'm not in higher education, I should say that there aren't a lot of books that are written for not faculty, if I can say it that way, right? That, yeah, it's really faculty development that you are leading and facilitating, and you're writing it for, although there's so many names for all the different roles that could be in that kind of teaching and learning center spot, right? But there maybe aren't a lot. Most books seem to have be written for faculty about how to teach or they often say teach, don't they? Facilitate, but this is really nice and a good niche.
And we do have a growing literature in educational development or faculty development, which has been really great. So there have been some books that have come out recently about developing course design institutes and faculty learning communities and other common professional learning program structures, but not yet anything specifically for workshops. And in higher ed, workshops are one of the most common forms that we use for professional learning programming. So this felt like a perfect fit. And it's also a programming format that I love facilitating in. And so, I thought that this would be a really great way to not only add to the literature in the field, but also hopefully share some resources that can help people go further with their learning.
Exactly. And I should say I've read the book. So, sometimes maybe I haven't read the whole book for folks I've talked to, but this one I definitely did. I've read the whole thing. And I think I can say that even if people are out there and they don't work inside post-secondary institutions, then this is still great. There's so many things. Well, I think the whole book probably is absolutely relevant to people who are designing and facilitating in corporate settings or nonprofits or wherever you happen to be outside of post-secondary. So you've captured that audience as well, right? Your primary audience is post-secondary.
I had a feeling other people might be.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even in my own work, I still work in K-12 as well. And so you'll even find like some of the things that some of the groups that I've worked with in K-12 has also influenced the ideas that I share in the book too. So I didn't want this to feel like only higher ed people can read it. But yes, it is primarily geared towards people in higher ed, with the understanding that secondary audience could be just the people that you mentioned, people in corporate, people in nonprofit, people in K-12, people in other settings. Basically anyone who designs or facilitates workshops. I think they'll find some helpful nuggets in the book.
Yeah. I sometimes think that the K to 12 teachers, they get all sorts of stuff because they go to teachers college. And I think sometimes that's not really the case. Like, I'm not a trained teacher in that way myself, so I can only guess or just, think about what I've heard. But I've had people say who are from K to 12, oh, like the book I've written is really relevant to them. And I didn't really almost intend for that to happen. So it's nice that there are all sorts of different sectors out there that can benefit from a book, and your book seems so wide ranging in that respect.
Thank you. And honestly, what you said about that last part about even people that you weren't necessarily expecting to read the book, I feel like that's something that I would love to see more of in all of our fields, is a willingness to look at resources that they may not be labeled higher ed, or they may not be labeled K-12 or corporate or nonprofit, but they still have a lot of wisdom to offer in terms of our design and facilitation of experiences. So for example, I've read your book and I absolutely loved it. I read Leanne Hughes's book and she works primarily in corporate. There's also the book by, is it Dan Fitzpatrick, about workshop design? I'm forgetting the full title right now, and he's mostly in corporate. And so in my mind, I'm just like, anything that might help, I can adapt it to my own context. And so my hope is that the same thing will happen with this book too, that even if you're not in higher ed specifically, that you'll be able to take the ideas and adapt it to your own context too.
Yeah, I agree. And you mentioned someone from Sweden has read it, and I'm sure other countries as well. And that's the nice thing too, that with social media platforms like LinkedIn and others, like, we have so much access now to people around the world. So both to kind of share learning, but also to learn ourselves, right? It's just this whole, your book's going to go global.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. So when you were writing the book, did anything happen to you in terms of your thoughts around your own work, your own design and facilitation practice? Did you discover things as you were writing and researching the book, or was it pretty cut and dry to write it from start to finish?
Well, I feel like I definitely came in with my ideas of what I wanted to write about. And then as I was writing the book and researching different topics, you're just like, oh my goodness, there's so much out there about this topic. And so I feel like I definitely discovered additional books that I wanted to read and podcasts that I wanted to listen to, and people who are working in the field of facilitation, whether it's within K-12 or externally as well. And so it excites me. And that's also one of the things that I was glad I was able to bring into the book, was that as I was writing it and discovering all of these resources, I was putting together these toolkits that basically each chapter has a workshop toolkit, which is a Google Doc full of additional resources related to the topic of the chapter, so that readers can also go deeper. And so I'm really glad that I was able to take the things that I was discovering and then put into the toolkit so that readers will also be able to kind of go down the rabbit hole and explore these resources further.
Yes, at the end of every chapter, there's several things where you can kind of jump off. And I think one of them is a community as well, right? You have a bit of you're collecting people in some way. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it's called the Facilitators Lounge, and it's really simple, honestly. It's not on a platform like the Circle or anything like that. Yeah. Basically, what I've done is I've created these private web pages on my site, and there's a page for each chapter. And so readers can scan the QR code or visit the link that's at the end of each chapter and access the web page, and they could use that space to post questions or comments or ideas. Basically, I wanted it to be so that if people wanted to be able to engage with other readers, they can do that.
Now, it is, you mentioned it's a big book in terms of the scope of what you wrote about, really kind of soup to nuts, we might say in a colloquial way. And that's a heavy lift. I mean, it's not easy to kind of go right from the beginning of, who are the learners and all the other things we consider to, growing the practice, I think, in the end. But you pulled it all together with, I think, a framework that you created, the workshop wheel. This is something that you created, right? To provide the structure for the book. How did that come about?
I honestly don't remember exactly where it popped into my brain. I think I had the principles first, and then the framework of the wheel kind of came to my mind afterwards, which is something else that happens when you're writing, where like through the process of writing, your thinking on the topic develops further, and you're like, oh, wait, this is a better way to kind of organize this. So I think that's how that kind of came to be. But yeah, the workshop wheel is basically 10 key principles that we want to be intentional about when we're designing and facilitating workshops. And each of the principles is the focus of one of the first 10 chapters of the book. And so the principles are relevant, purposeful, structured, inclusive, connective, active, reflective, ongoing, responsive, and distinctive.
Yeah, that's great. And you can't see her, everyone, but she did that from memory. She is not looking at a list. I was like, should we pull out the book? Because there's 10 principles. It's a lot to remember, but it does provide a nice guide. And so each chapter goes into one of the principles in the workshop wheel. Yeah. I'm going to pick out a couple or three or four things that I highlighted, because of course my copy's full of highlighted bits as I was going through, because I think when we read each other's books, of course, there's some things that we know we've been doing ourselves or whatever. And then there's other activities or there's words or phrases where it kind of makes us pause a little bit. So these are some of those. The first one is in the who are your learners section. So just thinking about who we're designing for. And this was an interesting term. I haven't actually seen this mentioned in education context. I've seen it in a healthcare context because I design for a lot of healthcare related organizations. You said whichever group you're working with, whichever type of learner group or whatever, is not a monolith. And I thought that's so interesting that you've used it in this context, but so relevant. Can you just describe that a little bit? Like, what do you mean by that? Just in case people haven't heard that term in education before. I'm not sure it's that common.
Yeah, so I use it in the sense that when we're thinking about participant groups, so I'll use higher ed, for example, I mostly facilitate workshops for instructors. And it's easy to think of instructors as this one singular group with this word, which is where that monolith concept comes from. But if we really think about it, there's a lot of diversity within that group. Like we could break that up into subgroups, and each of those subgroups is also incredibly diverse. So thinking about instructors, you may have, full-time instructors, part-time instructors, et cetera. You may have instructors who are early career, who are later career, who are mid-career. And so we really want to go beyond just thinking about them as a whole group to also thinking about, once again, who makes up that group, what's the diversity within that. And that's going to help us to also ensure that whatever we're designing is taking into account the specific needs of the individuals that make up that group.
And we could apply that to other contexts too, can't we? Because I know in higher ed, the thing was always like, oh, those first year students, they don't really know as much. Or something like that.
It's a pretty big group, right?
It's a pretty big group. It's quite diverse. So yeah, just thinking about, you've got a main title for a group, but there's all sorts of subgroups within there. Yeah.
Yeah. And even as you're designing, workshops, you may decide to do something that is pretty broad and open to anyone that's within that larger group. Or you might design targeted programming that's specifically geared towards the needs and interests of people within the subgroups. And so even just thinking about like, okay, is this something that's going to be more general or more targeted? And how can I make sure that I'm getting the information I need from the participants in order to design the session in a way that's going to be most useful to them?
Do you go so far as to write profiles for those subgroups? Or I can't remember what you said in the book, but how do you flesh those subgroups out?
So I personally haven't done learner profiles yet. I've been listening to a lot of great podcasts about it recently, though, because I know ATD has done a few podcast episodes about learner profiles. And we are starting to see some discussions about learner profiles in higher ed spaces as well, like some webinars and whatnot. But I personally haven't done them yet. I tend to do more of the surveys, discussions, emails, using those as sources of information that can then shape how I'm going to design the session. But as you mentioned, like that is one way that you could learn more about the people you're designing for. I know other people have done like empathy maps and, there's all sorts of strategies people could use. And I think that's exciting. Like there's not one right way that we have to learn about our learners and the fact that we have different options, I think that also allows us to choose approaches that are going to make the most sense for the resources we have available, the time we have available, what people might be most responsive to, et cetera.
And I think you've mentioned time in the book. I mean, in your context, is time of the essence? And really, it's a lot to ask. All these things that we do, right, to design and then facilitate. Is it challenging in your context to find the time to create the types of learning experiences that you want to? Or do you see your colleagues struggling with time in that respect?
I do feel really grateful that I'm in a position where I feel like I've got a lot of autonomy. And so I'm able to actually take in the information that I'm gleaning from my conversations with faculty to figure out what's going to be most appropriate. And I have the time to be able to develop those programs. I think the timing piece that's a little bit more challenging is finding time that everyone can come. So that's kind of the the eternal question that we have is like, what's the best time to offer a workshop? And the answer is always like never. And it's funny because that question comes up every so often. Like we have these listservs of people that work in higher ed and do educational development. We have webinars and whatnot, and that question comes up quite frequently. And there's no good answer to that. And so I think what a lot of institutions are trying to do more of is just being more intentional about offering multiple sessions, or even just being intentional about not doing everything during the daytime, but maybe even offering some options in the evenings, to be more inclusive of people's schedules. So I think there's other approaches we're trying to find to address that enigma of finding the perfect time that everyone can come, because it just doesn't exist.
It's interesting that you say that, because literally just yesterday, I had that conversation with a potential client who is in post-secondary here. And that's what they were saying. But they kind of boiled it down to the right people are in the room too, that even if there's only 6 people there, then that's okay. The right people need to be there. Sometimes we want more than that. Of course, there's some people that we want to get to those events that perhaps should be there, and we hope they're going to be there, but they're not. But yeah, it's interesting that it's a widespread challenge, because I just heard it yesterday.
Yeah.
The other thing you said in that section was the who are your learners section was around trying to ascertain what needs are not being expressed by those learners that are coming to the workshops or not coming. It kind of made me pause a little bit too, because sometimes I think with needs assessments, we really rely on what people are telling us, those overt things that they're putting it, in the answers to the surveys or whatever it is that we're doing. And it seems to me kind of like a design thinking problem in a way, right? How do we get it out of, if it's faculty coming to those sessions or whoever the participants are, how do we get to the needs that they're not expressing?
I feel like part of it comes from what we know in terms of what's happening on a broader level. So for example, when I think about, higher ed specifically, there are conversations that are happening on a local or regional or national level. And I feel like if you're tapped into communities or just, staying on top of what's happening in the news and things like that, there may be things that are top of mind there that maybe people haven't expressed here. And so that's one way that you can learn about those needs that are not being expressed. And I would also just say the background knowledge and experience that we have specifically within teaching. Like sometimes people will say like, oh, I'm having this issue. And there's like a different root cause and maybe they're thinking about. And so I think even just that prior knowledge and experience about what teaching and learning entails can also help to identify those like unidentified needs.
Yeah, the cell phones in the classroom maybe just came to mind, right? It's like, oh, how do we get people to not use their cell phones? It's like, well, that's really just a classroom management problem. It's not really a cell phone problem sometimes, right? It's
and an attention problem, right? There's like other things,
activity
other
design
layers.
problem. Yeah, there's all sorts of, I love those kind of little puzzles, like what's happening? And then how can we tease this out for sure? Yeah. Another nice term I saw you using in the book was multidirectional. And again, this isn't a word that I tend to think of in terms of, you said participants are learning from each other. That's what we want. We also want them to learn from the facilitator. Yes, of course. And then the facilitator learns from the participants. And so, I think a lot of us get or hope for that to happen. I don't necessarily think of it as multidirectional. So that's a nice word to kind of help people out, I think, who are designing. Is that common in your context? Like just this I'm like using my hands. I feel like there's like a map there, right? Like we want people learning from each other, and it's a real mindset to bring to our work.
Yeah, so that word I intentionally chose because I wanted to emphasize the fact that workshops shouldn't be like we often see them, where it's someone standing at the room dumping all of this information on participants, and participants are just expected to take that information and leave, right? And so I intentionally use that word because I think it communicates the fact that it really should be spaces where everyone's learning from each other, right? So even as a facilitator, I'm going to learn things from the participants in the room. Participants should have space to learn from each other through intentionally designed activities. And then also they'll be learning from me as well. And so I wanted to put that in there to just kind of emphasize, like, we need to be intentional about designing activities that promote all different types of engagement. And that way it gets away from the sage on the stage and we're all actually being able to learn from each other.
Yeah. Not everybody's even heard that term yet, the sage on the stage and guide on the side. So we think, oh, some of us, it's been around with us forever, but others are still learning some of these terms. And I heard chalk and talk actually this week as well. And just we have, some of those corny expressions, but they are maybe warning signs for us to watch out for and to try to do something different, aren't they?
For sure.
You also talked about the facilitator zone versus the participant zone. And again, that's new language to me, but just can you explain that a little bit? Like how those two terms, facilitator zone and participant zone, help somebody who's designing a workshop?
Yeah, so the facilitator zone would be times when the facilitator is explaining information or modeling skills during a workshop. And then the participant zone would be times when participants are actively engaging with the content or with each other. So maybe they are doing a poll or a discussion or a writing activity, something where they're actually processing and applying the information they're learning. And so I use the terms facilitator zone and participant zone to just break down that when we're designing a learning experience, we want to make sure that there is variety in terms of those zones, because oftentimes in a session, we might start with a little bit of the participant zone, right? So maybe there's an opening activity and we ask people to introduce themselves, but then maybe 90% of it after that is the facilitator just talking to participants. And then there's a short Q&A session at the end. And so I wanted us to kind of move away from that and think about how can we mix up the facilitator and participant zone so it's chunked throughout the session. So maybe you're starting with a short participant activity and then you're explaining some information and then participants are doing something to process that information and then you're bringing on some more content. So it's all about chunking and really including those interactive opportunities throughout. The chunking idea is really common within the educational field. In the book, Training from the Back of the Room, Sharon Bowman, who's a trainer, also talks about the importance of creating space for those kind of active learning opportunities throughout. And her recommendation is to try to keep the times when you're speaking to about 10 minutes at a time before you include opportunities for participants to do something. So I think the facilitator zone and participant zone is just language that I've used to capture that idea of chunking throughout the session and making sure that there's variety there.
It can be a visual too, because you in the book have two visuals to kind of show, like, it's almost like what do we call that? It's almost like a little bar chart or something, right? Where you're just showing visually, that tiny bit of participant zone and then the huge facilitator zone and then the tiny bit of probably Q&A participant zone at the end. And then the alternative, which is that variety that you're talking about. I think for the visual folks among us, like that can be helpful as well. If while they're planning, they could create just like a tiny little image like that to apply it to what they've planned so far. And does anything need to change?
Well, and you also made me think about the session lab tool, which is another great way to kind of take that facilitator participant zone idea and apply it when you're using that tool to plan. Because in Session Lab, you can actually color code things. So you might go through your plans and be like, okay, is this part facilitator zone or participant zone? And if you color code everything that way, then you'll be able to see at a glance, okay, there's a lot of blue, which may be facilitator zone, and very little red, which might be participant zone. How can I include some additional activities to break up those long portions of me just talking to participants?
That's great. I know Session Lab has a lesson planning tool, but I haven't really used it. I'm not a member of Session Lab, although I love those folks. Hi, Session Lab. So yeah, that's great to know that there's color coding within there. In my lesson plan template, I have, and this wasn't, somebody taught me, of course, this along the way, but I have a facilitator activities column and a participant activities column. And I put all of the stuff basically in the facilitator activities column, but the participant activities column, I'll say what the participants are doing just briefly. So I always say, like, if it says sitting and listening too many times in a row, I have a problem. I have to make a change there in one of the rows. Yeah. So we have different ways to do that kind of check and balance to make sure we're creating something participatory.
Yeah.
You referenced the Universal Design for Learning guidelines all throughout the book. That was really great to see. So if people haven't heard that term before, how do you recommend that they get started? Because it's a big framework.
Yeah.
Is there something that's worked for you?
Well, one thing I will say is, like you said, Universal Design for Learning is a huge framework, and it can take some time to wrap your head around it. And I know for me, it took a while before it eventually all clicked. So if anyone else is listening and you're like, I've heard of this thing, I've started looking into it, and I started to feel overwhelmed, you're not alone. It can take a little bit of time to kind of parse and get it to fit. But basically, Universal Design for Learning acknowledges that there's a lot of variability amongst learners and that there are barriers to learning that exist in the learning environment, meaning in the way that we may have designed the learning or the physical environment where the learning is going to be facilitated. And so we want to think intentionally about how we can minimize those barriers for learning and honor the variability of the learners that have come to our sessions. So the Universal Design for Learning guidelines were developed by CAST, and you can basically just go online and Google udlguidelines.org. And I would say that one easy way to start is just to focus on just one principle at a time, because there's, multiple means of representation and engagement and action and expression. I would just kind of start with one principle, like multiple means of engagement, and start with one guideline. And if you go to the website, you can click around to actually read what the guidelines are all about and examples of what it might look like in practice. And in my book, I'm actually trying to apply those principles to the design and facilitation of workshops, because oftentimes UDL principles are applied within classroom teaching contexts, but the same thing applies to adult learners. There's a lot of variability here too. And so how can we think about these same principles in the way that we design and facilitate workshops?
Yeah, and it's big. And so I like the, just dive into one area, because we can never do all the things in any one workshop or course anyway,
Right.
can we?
Right.
So, because it's not all relevant or whatever. So yeah, that's a great, just do what you can, I guess.
Start with one piece.
Start with one piece. Yeah. And it's iterative, isn't it? Like we learn more as the more we try to apply it over time.
Yeah. And actually, when you were just speaking right now, it reminded me of another recommendation from the book, Reach Everyone, Teach Everyone. So it's written by Thomas Tobin and Kirsten Behling. I'm hoping I pronounced her name correctly, but they basically recommend what they call a +1 approach, that instead of thinking about all of the aspects of UDL at once, that you just want to think about one additional way that you can meet learners where they are. So maybe one additional way that you can represent information, or one additional way that people can demonstrate their understanding. And that has been a super helpful way to think about UDL, especially for people who are just getting started. Like, what's one additional option I can provide than what I've already designed? And then you can continue to build from there. So that would be another recommendation. Use the +1 approach.
Yeah. And you've talked about that, the element of choice a lot, right? I think, many times throughout the book, you've probably given those options and what you would do and what you would offer. Yeah. It's been really useful. You have a whole chapter on adopting an inclusive mindset. I'm going to put words in your mouth maybe, but has learning about and designing to inclusion and accessibility, has it been one of your biggest learning areas over the past while, or is it something else? What do you think you've really spent a lot of time in these last few years?
Yeah, so I feel like I didn't know that I didn't know. And once I realized that I didn't know, I was like, okay, I need to fill this gap. And I have to give thanks to a lot of the people in my professional learning network. So people like Anne Gagne and Sarah Silverman and Michael McCreary and Kate Kirby and Mandy Penny, and I might be missing some other names, but so many people who have just been so generous in sharing what they know about accessibility, and also about disability and how we can really design with those things in mind. Because I didn't realize that some of the things I was doing were actually creating additional barriers. And I actually
we
wrote
all
a whole
have that. Yeah, it happens to all of us for sure.
Mm-hmm. But it's like, once you know, then you're like, well, I don't want to continue doing this. So how can I rectify this? And I actually wrote an article for Edutopia that was called something to the effect of mistakes I used to make in digital accessibility and how I learned to do better, because it was very much a light bulb moment. So for me, my learning processes look like listening to, once again, people in the field who know a lot and who are sharing a lot about this, following additional people in other spaces on social media. I've been attending a lot of webinars. So 3Play Media does a lot of webinars about accessibility. Accessibility has also been a bigger topic in like workshops and conferences that have been happening lately. So I try to attend those sessions as well. And then whatever I'm learning, I'm trying to apply it and, have grace with myself when I make mistakes, but then also try to continuously do better and improve so that once again, I'm not creating additional barriers for the people that are attending my sessions.
It's a vulnerable spot to be in, isn't it? Because as you are learning these things and going along and then immediately applying it, the faculty sitting in your workshops are watching you model that for the first time, maybe. Like it's big, isn't it? But it's so important. And maybe that ties back to the earlier that I was asking you about, where the participants of your workshops might have needs that they haven't expressed. It maybe is a lot in this area where people haven't come across the things around accessibility or inclusion or trauma-informed practice or whatever it happens to be. So you're the first, time.
We have to model it, right?
Yeah, we have to.
Yeah. And I think, in higher ed, we also have some laws that are going to be coming out, I believe next year. I believe there's going to be way more expectations in terms of making sure that the materials we're designing are accessible. And so a lot of universities are thinking way more intentionally about, okay, how do we now equip our faculty to learn about these accessibility principles so that when they're designing materials for their courses, things have captions and alt text and appropriate heading structure and whatnot. So there's a lot of professional learning that is starting to happen and will continue to happen over the next year in regards to that. And I think another approach that I try to take in terms of my work with faculty is starting small, right? So I'm not going to start with, here are all the WCAG standards, but here are maybe 5 areas that we can think about, in terms of your documents, applying heading structure, just starting simple and continuing to build from there, I think is really helpful. And I think being vulnerable with them and letting them know, like, this has been a learning journey for me as well, can be helpful to them as they're also beginning their own journeys in this area.
That's so modeling of vulnerability as well. And just, that we're learners in this space. I said that recently to a client because a few episodes ago, I talked with Nora Loyst about creating like a what to expect document. Like, here's what we've done to plan for an inclusive, accessible experience for you. And so I've just been working on the one for my in-person meeting facilitation, actually not workshops, but meeting facilitation. And so I said to the client, listen, I want to do this kind of document, like a comprehensive document, trying to keep it lean. But are you open to that? And they said, absolutely. Because of course they're a healthcare nonprofit and they're right in there, right? They want to learn from our example of what we're doing. I said, you can quote unquote steal this and use it for yourself, right? So you probably do the same with faculty, like steal everything that you're doing. Yes. And that's totally appropriate, right?
Well, and I just wanted to say, I've really enjoyed listening to those 2. I think you did 2 recent episodes about accessibility, and literally I was listening in the car like, okay, I got to pull over and take some notes or revisit these ideas because everything that they shared was just so helpful and insightful. So thanks to the previous guests for sharing, because even just like I said, listening to your podcast, attending other people's sessions, all of these things are helping us all to build our knowledge and skill set in this area.
Yeah, there's no shortage of learning out there for us all, right? To tap into. We just have to have the time and the motivation to do it and to really know that, there's a lot out there that we don't know, and we just be humble about it. I think like we can't know it all. It's huge. Our jobs are so huge in terms of what we have to know, but it's the exciting part too.
Yep. Get to learn all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about connection, because I love how you had a phrase in there saying connection isn't guaranteed just because you've pulled together a group of people in the room. And I kind of smiled and I thought, that is it. The need to be intentional about fostering connection is so prevalent for us all. So just because we invited a whole bunch of people to a workshop doesn't mean they're actually going to connect with us or connect with each other or whatever. What are some of your favorite things that you tend to do to foster connection in your workshops?
That is a huge question.
It is. What's top of mind?
So one of the things that I talk about in the book is that there are different types of connections that we want to be intentional about fostering. So learner to facilitator, facilitator to learner, learner to learner. And so in terms of like helping participants get to know me, one of the things that I've done is I'll create a video, and I actually did this at my university when I first started here. And this was actually inspired by an idea from someone that I was working with previously. He's like, we should make a video and, help people get to know who you are. And I was like, that's a great idea. So we recorded the video, we added it to all of the workshop registration pages. And I was actually getting emails from faculty saying like, oh, thank you for being so personable. And I'm excited to come to your session. And even though the video wasn't about the workshop in particular, just them being able to see me beforehand and, experience the energy and all of that, I think was really helpful in them beginning to form those connections with me. So that's one thing that I would continue to do. And even if I'm, facilitating externally, I'm also trying to create more videos as a way of helping participants get to know me before we actually have the session. In terms of facilitating connections between learners, there are endless tools that we could use. And I really enjoy using protocols to help people connect with each other. So there's a Center for Leadership and Educational Equity that has, I think, over 100 different protocols that you can use for fostering discussions about text or feedback sessions or coaching, all sorts of things like that. Liberating structures, of course, are another favorite, things like 1, 2, for all and TRIZ as another way of helping people to be able to connect with each other. And then lastly, we also want to think about how we can get to know participants. And there's lots of different things we can do for this, but one favorite strategy is doing like Padlet introductions, where you might share a link to a Padlet board prior to the session, and then invite participants to make a little post. Maybe it's a video or an audio recording or whatever other media they want to use, where they're introducing themselves. So that way you can get to know them prior to the session, and they can also get to know each other. So those are a few ideas.
It's a big question for sure, as you've said. Can you tell me about the word protocol? Because that was also new language to me. Can we just say that a protocol is an activity, or is there something different between a protocol and an activity?
I think of a protocol as a structure for discussion. And I know that the Center for Leadership and Educational Equity has a specific definition they use. I don't know it off the top of my head.
Okay.
But I believe it's something to the effect of, it's a structure that you're providing in order to make sure that all voices can contribute to the conversation. That's the way I think about it.
Okay. That's helpful. Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting. Again, the beauty of learning across countries, across cultures, and just these new terms where, we think we've been doing this for a while and we've kind of heard all the things. No, we have not, because there's certain, when you're making up words too, of course, right? In a good
multidirectional.
way. Yeah. No, it's apt for sure. Near the end of the book, you have profiles of 7 facilitators, which I enjoyed reading. And a couple of them I did know who they were because they've been interviewed by Bonni Stachowiak on her podcast or whatever. Tolulope, I think, was one of them. What prompted you to add those profiles in there? What were you hoping to give the readers with those additional folks?
Yeah, so I think it goes back to that multidirectional piece, that even within the book, I don't want readers to only hear my voice or to only hear my ideas or only hear my experiences, because there are so many different ways that we can approach this work of facilitation, and who we are is going to directly impact how we do this work. And so I thought the best way to actually show that would be to include interviews in the book that represent that. And I also want to give thanks to one of my, I don't know who it was, but one of the reviewers for the early reviewers for the book recommended that I include some interviews too. And I was like, yes, this would be a perfect chapter to do that in, to actually make that point of we bring who we are to our work, and that's going to influence the way we do this. And so, I'm very grateful to the 7 people who said yes so that I could include their stories. And I think that through reading them, you'll see, once again, the different approaches people have taken, but then also how different aspects of their identity have directly shaped how they approach this work. And I'm hoping that will also give freedom to readers to lean into who they are as facilitators and to operate from that place, because when we are authentic in our facilitation approach, it's going to help us connect better with our participants, and also hopefully show them that they can bring who they are to whatever work that they do too.
That's really nice. And I think I got that out of them. I read that part without a highlighter in my hand, so I have to go back and dive into them again, because there were certain turns of phrase or just things that they were talking about around their philosophy that were really interesting, that maybe aren't things that I would tend to think about or just that would shape my work. So I found them really, really interesting. Just a little look into somebody's world, because we do a lot of professional development ourselves, of course, but sometimes there's only so much time in the day too. Like we could look into other people's workshops a little bit more, and just to have more evidence, I guess, of what other people are thinking and doing out there is always a good thing.
Well, and that's also one of the recommendations I have in the last chapter of my book, is like, one way that we can continue to grow as facilitators is by attending other people's sessions and not only paying attention to the content of the session, but also to the way they're facilitating. And that's one of my favorite ways to actually develop myself as a professional is, I'll attend other webinars that people are doing or other sessions that they're holding with the eye on what are they doing? How are they doing it? What impact is this having on the learning experience? What do I want to take and adapt to my work? What fits, what doesn't, all of those sorts of things. And so it's actually encouraging me to engage in this ongoing reflection on my practice through watching the practices of other people.
Yeah, I do the same. And I think I became better about doing that once I wrote my book too, because I talked about using a learning journal and, learning from other facilitators, because I know I had always done that. And other people's workshops had been pivotal for me in some respects, right? And I really only realized that as I looked back. But I was just reading my learning journal the other day, and some things I've written down, I'm like, what is that? Like, I should have been more descriptive about the thing. Like, so just use your learning journals or whatever you're using out there, folks, and be descriptive, because we can't implement it all right away. But if we look back, like, we have to just record it, but also look back and actually integrate those things in our practice that we've seen other people using, or sometimes it's stuff we don't really want to do, but I wouldn't write that down, but we learn from that way as well, don't we?
Well, and one thing that I've been doing is I actually have a file on Google Drive, which is called, I call it Tolu's favorite facilitation techniques. It's basically a document where I've started listing specific examples of things that I've seen or read or watched in videos that I want to try using in the future. And if any listeners are interested, I also have a template that's available on my site. So if anyone else just wants to download it, and then you can just plug in, there's sections for, strong openers or unofficial starts or discussion activities. And so as you are once again coming across activities, you can just plug them into that document. And that way, when you're designing workshops in the future, you have kind of one place you can go to remind yourself of all the ideas that you've come across.
That's so good. I'm glad you've given people that template and that prompt, because we started doing that in my company a couple of years ago. And it's more to get it out of my head, because I was working with other people too. And even just to go and look at that list of all the potential group agreements that we might propose, or opening activities, as you say, or all those, I can never capture it all, but just it kind of helps prompt my thinking a little bit when I'm doing that design work. Again, writing it down and trying to put it somewhere useful for us.
Yeah.
What's next for you? It doesn't have to be a book, but maybe you've got another book. Did you get another book idea as you were writing this one? Or is there future learning for you that's exciting coming up?
So I'm not letting myself think about another book right now. I think right now I just want to enjoy this part of the process, the engaging with readers around the book, seeing what their thoughts are, that piece of it. I'm just really excited to see how people are engaging with the work. I don't have any big plans coming up next. I have ideas of maybe some events I might want to facilitate moving forward, but nothing that's solidified. It's more just an idea for now, and we'll see where it goes.
Yeah. Maybe you need that kind of fallow period.
A little bit of distance.
Yeah. And you're going to promote this one and do a bunch of talks and conference facilitations, I'm sure. Yeah. And then you'll probably get another idea and off to the races. Yep. Yeah. Any final words about what you learned writing the book, or anything that's current in your practice? What do you want to share as we close our session here?
I guess the last thing I would say is to never stop learning about what you can do in terms of facilitation. I think my biggest takeaway is that there's so many different approaches, so much more to learn, and it's actually really exciting for me. And so I just encourage listeners to continue reading books, listening to podcasts, observing other facilitators, practicing the art of facilitation, because the more we engage in thought around this work and practice this work, the more we'll be able to create meaningful and impactful experiences for our participants.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for making the time to chat with me. I feel like we've had more laughs in this episode. Maybe some of them will cut out, but we've laughed a lot through this one. So I've learned something for sure from you, Tolu, and I've had a good time as well. Thanks for being with me.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, it was such a great pleasure to talk with Tolu, and I hope you enjoyed how we just laughed throughout the entire episode. We had a good time with each other. She's very easy to talk to, and I just really enjoyed that conversation because we went in all sorts of different directions. Of course, there's way more in her book, Designing and Facilitating Workshops with Intentionality, and I hope you go and pick it up, even if you don't work inside post-secondary or inside higher education. Another way to say that, as you hopefully heard, a lot or all of the things that she talks about in the book are really relevant to us in all contexts and all situations when we're designing and facilitating workshops. I hope you enjoyed me questioning Tolu about some of the terminology in her book, She has created some of it, of course, and then some of it is just because I don't work in the same country as she does, and I don't work in the same context as she does. So it was neat for me to kind of tease out some of those words, and I hope that you found that a valuable part of our conversation. I encourage you to follow Tolu on social media. You are going to find out how to get a hold of her via the show notes. She's on Blue Sky and LinkedIn, and hopefully you can follow her and see how her progress is going with her book and maybe even future books that she might choose to write in the future. We will see. Thank you so much to Tolu again for coming with me on the show and having that great conversation. I hope you enjoyed it. Coming up on the podcast, my next episode is with Andy Sontag. Andy is a learning experience designer and program director of Chaos Pilot Experience Design. So what are we going to be talking about in the next episode? Experience design methodology. So useful to our learning design work, and I can't wait to learn more from Andy. Please join us then. Thank you so much for listening to the show. You can find the show notes with all of the details about how to follow any of my guests, find them, go to the links that we've talked about in the episodes. You can all find it at facilitatingonpurpose.ca. Feel free to reach out to me about any episode to share feedback, and I would love it if you would share it with a friend or a colleague who you think might enjoy it too. Thanks, as always, to Mary Chan for her excellent editing support on this episode. See you next time.